This video is about anti-darkness in the so-called spiritual community, or what some may refer to as the conscious community. And I think this is a topic that should be addressed because I see a lot of this. I mean, I see so much of it that I'm just compelled to make a video about this. You know, in social media, meetings, live streams, discussions, I think a lot of people just say this as it kind of sort of comes naturally to them without realizing they're saying it, without realizing what they're actually implying. A lot of this has to do with how many of us have been programmed by the patriarchy, religion, and so forth. But what I mean is that, like, in a lot of the so-called spiritual community, and I mean everywhere I see online, you know, in certain discussions, in many videos, it's always darkness bad, light good, want to get away from the darkness. Oh, they're on some dark stuff. Oh, that's chaotic bad, order good, light good. You know, everyone seems to talk this way except a select few. Everyone leans towards this notion that it's all about the light and we want to get away from the darkness. I see this again and again and again. So I want to talk about this a little bit. Let's dive into this topic. I think what it is that so many individuals are really afraid of the dark deep down inside, and there's a psychological reason for that. And I think it also has to do with the conditioning, and I want to get into those topics and talk about why that is. You know, many people who see themselves as spiritual, or who identify as spiritual or call themselves spiritual, you know, they find the dark side, or the so-called left-hand path, to be, I say, distasteful, because, you know, deep down inside, they're really frightened of it. So what they do, and this is what I want to talk about, is because they're afraid of it deep down inside, and I want to talk about why they're psychologically afraid of it, they construct, they build their own periscope, or their own viewpoint, their own perspective as to why light is superior and dark is inferior. And that's not the case. That's an inversion. It's the other way around, and that's what I want to talk about a little bit here. And I gotta admit, I was once there. You know, I was once under the banner of Abrahamic religion, you know, until I freed myself and got out of it. Now that I've freed myself from it, I see that there are so many that gather beneath the banner of religion and the Abrahamic God for shelter, because deep inside they're afraid. The structure of the right-hand path, such as Abrahamic religion, gives them walls, a name for what's right and what's wrong, a promise that the unknown has already been mapped out for them. And then beyond those walls is what some refer to as the so-called left-hand path, a path that is unbounded, uncertain, and deeply personal, as opposed to the so-called right-hand path. And I only use those terms, right-hand path and left-hand path, for a lack of another description of it, because those are sort of like generic terms that most people may know these things as. You know, so we'll call it, just for the sake of this video, for the sake of this discussion, we'll refer to it as the left-hand path, or the dark side. That's just keeping it simple for now. You know, this is the path of internal shadow work, the path of the dark side, which asks the individual to stand alone, to question everything, to take responsibility for their own meaning without the comfort of some sort of external divine approval. And for many, that kind of liberation feels more like exposure to them. So they'd rather choose the safety of following a religious doctrine or running toward the light. They kneel and pray, not always from devotion, but from dread. Because, you know, religion becomes a shelter built from borrowed certainty. You know, it's like a cage they learn to call salvation. Within their safety blanket of their own theology, every question is automatically tackled before it can be asked. You know, it's like with religion, every fear is dressed up and repackaged as faith. But beyond the gates, beyond those walls, waits what we call the left-hand path, or what some refer to as Universe B. Again, like, Universe B is another word I'm using sort of generically or loosely to describe something maybe on a mundane human level, to make it make sense for the point I'm making in this video. So that so-called left-hand path, Universe B, it's silent, vast, and merciless in its honesty. Because the dark side requires no shepherd, no script, no promise to be held and comforted. Only the self, stripped of illusion and forced to become its own God or to otherwise collapse under the weight of its own truth. That's the challenge that deep inside many really don't want to do. And this is why you get those who talk about, who repeat this rhetoric about how the dark is bad. That person is dark. Get away from that person. They're dark. We need to have the light. The light is what we're after. The light is what we're in pursuit of. And a lot of this rhetoric in the so-called spiritual community, that all there is light. We have to embrace the light. And there's a big imbalance here. That's what I want to get into. And so for people who remain on the so-called right-hand path or the path of light and who want nothing to do with the darkness, they cling tighter to their own chains, mistaking obedience for peace, not realizing that the right-hand path is really a prison that enslaves you deeper into the matrix. And they will say the same thing about what I'm saying. They'll say the opposite, but they'll say the same thing about me on the opposite side. I guarantee you that they will accuse me of the same thing I'm accusing them of. They'll say that I'm going in the wrong direction because, they think of the dark side and the left-hand path as what will actually imprison them, but it's really the other way around. They're really afraid deep down inside, and so they've inverted the truth. They've reversed it. They've constructed their own idea that makes them feel safe in. So that's why they've reversed and inverted things, because really the darkness is superior, the light is inferior, and that's what I want to break down and explain. But because people are afraid of what's really superior and they find comfort in what's really inferior, they invert it and they create their own perspective of how the darkness is inferior and the light's superior. Because see, the way I see it is like, scientifically speaking, the path of darkness, which is chaos, is freedom. Because the abyss does not comfort, but it demands doing the shadow work. It doesn't have restraints. People that cling to scripture or hearken to like an Abrahamic religion are really afraid to do the shadow work. See, physical form is light and light is illusion. In a certain perspective, all physical form is made of light. What we call physical form is light slowed down, and what we call light is physical form sped up, right? So the right-hand path is the path of light, which is the path of physical form. So if you're all about the light and you're against the darkness, you're really afraid of letting go of physical form. Anyone who remains on the right-hand path and strives only for the light and is against the darkness is someone who really only feels comfortable in the material world. And that's really attachment to the ego. That's what it is. That's why in religions such as the Abrahamic faiths, they have this concept of a life beyond the grave, because that you're either going to go to heaven or hell after you physically die. And the reason that they have that concept is because they are right-hand path. They cling to the ego. They cling to existence in physical form. They're too afraid to pursue the blank canvas, which is the great mother, the womb of creation where everything is from. They're too afraid to pursue the blank canvas where one can create their own light, create their own physical form, rather than be led by the physical form that's already been constructed by this demiurge, who is the Abrahamic God of this world. So yeah, there's a lot of this in the so-called spiritual community. Even people who aren't caught up in religion, even people who are like New Age spiritual, but they're not under the banner of anything Abrahamic, they don't worship a demiurge, maybe they're Buddhist or they meditate or whatever the case may be, they're still all about the light and anti-darkness, I'll give a few examples. There's this one dude, I'm not going to say any names, this one dude I met on social media. Him and I exchanged phone numbers, started talking, doing a little bit of meetings together on Zoom, live streams, and he parted ways with me because what I'm into is too frightening to him. He's too attached to the ego, and I was trying to explain to him on the phone one night, I was like, dark and light have nothing to do with good and evil in the way that you've been conditioned to look at it as, and he just kind of got upset with me or irritated because I think he's really frightened deep inside. And he just said to me, if you're trying to be all about the darkness, then that's where we go separate ways, bro. And hung the phone up on me, And then another example, this other person I became acquainted with on social media, she's all like, all of that satanic, demonic stuff, horror movie stuff, demon stuff, that's not the true darkness. That's not what darkness really is. And then she parted ways with me, because the thing is, like, deep down inside, it really frightens her. So she constructs her own way of looking at it so that she can see what darkness in the way she wants to see it as, so that she can feel safe deep down inside. Or this other person I became acquainted with, and we used to have Zoom meetings with a whole group. We used to discuss Gnostic concepts and various philosophies. And it's like he would loan lip service to acknowledging that the darkness exists. Like he would say, yeah, the darkness is the feminine, the light is the masculine, but he wouldn't ever want to philosophically dive deep into it or have a conversation about it or build on it, because maybe some things that happened to him in his past, he was just sort of scared of it. And he would say things like, in our Zoom meetings, he would say things like, when we take the true path of the ascended master, we realize all there is light, And so some of these guys, they're not religious, like they're not Christian or anything Abrahamic, but they're still going in that direction of afraid of the dark. Don't be afraid of the dark. So to dive deep into this, and I'm sharing my perspective, I'm sharing my opinion, I think what it is really is that it's like we all know that we're going to go someday. Death is inevitable, right? Death and taxes, as they say. So it's like, and to many of us, death is a big mystery, unless you've ascended to certain levels. So a lot of us is kind of like, I think, I'm trying to gather the words to make it make sense, to explain what I think it is, why these people are afraid. Deep down inside, people don't want to gamble with the risk of, what if that wasn't the right thing to do? Like what if I did get myself stuck somewhere where I'm really uncomfortable? Or, for whatever reason, psychologically deep inside, they're just really uncomfortable with so-called left-hand path or dark spirituality. But it creates a big imbalance. I think it's really ego attachment, If you're not doing shadow work, then you're not really visiting your true self, getting to know your true self, And this is why beyond the gates of the material world, which is light, waits the dark side, so-called universe B, left-hand path, whatever you want to call it, which, like I was saying, that's the path that is silent, vast, brutally honest. It strips the illusion away. It's an initiation where you put yourself through a furnace to burn away the ego baggage. It doesn't have the promise that you'll be saved, and that takes courage. That's the initiation. Like, do you get it? Hello, On the dark side, there is only self, stripped bare, and forced to face what is without illusion and without excuse. And basically that's why most turn away from the dark side. Most don't want the so-called left-hand path. And not always because they're weak, but sometimes just because it's just easier to inherit meaning than to forge your own meaning in the darkness. Like, it's easier to follow a path that's already been laid out for you, than to blaze your own trail via the blank canvas of the abyss, But then there are those few rare individuals like myself who don't flinch when the light disappears, who don't beg for answers, who don't run from the unknown, who don't need the comfort of some story to stand on, like in a religion or in some sort of light pursuit theology, for example, which I see most of in the spiritual community. And that's why, I can't be on a lot of these live streams, like on TikTok, Instagram, because the so-called spiritual community, not even religious people, but the so-called spiritual community, all these people talk about is getting to the light, and that's the light within, and the light this and the light that, and the light of creation, and the light of your divinity within, and that's when you find the light, and I don't even think they necessarily intend to do it. It's kind of just how they've been programmed. And then anything negative or anything bad to them, they automatically, that word dark comes up. And it's just kind of like how these people naturally talk. And that's why I don't mess with a lot of people in the so-called spiritual community. I stay to myself a lot. I used to go on live streams and have Zoom meetings with some of these people, but just not as much anymore. Because it's hard to find those rare few people that really get it when it comes to working with dark energy, that are really not afraid, that really know true self, that have really done the shadow work. There's a lot out there, but it's sort of hard to find those that you can interact with that really have this gnosis, that really have this knowledge. One great example is Bafa Marga. Y'all know, if y'all been watching my videos, Bafa Marga, that's my lady. Check out Bafa Marga's YouTube channel. I'm gonna link it right here in the description. It's Divine Hexadecimal. And her books, which I've done videos on, which I've promoted. She and I have done some good builds together. What I love about Bafa, I was telling my friend this, it's kind of rare to find a beautiful black woman who's really about the dark side, who really does this dark energy work. You're hard pressed to find a beautiful woman in the black community that's really about that so-called left-hand path energy. Bafa doesn't pretend the darkness isn't there like so many others do. She walks in it with her eyes open. She's not reckless, she's not blind, she's not afraid. She knows how to reprogram herself, her own internal technology, by tapping into these dark energy forces that are a part of self. She comprehends this in ways that many don't. It's rare to find someone that really has a grasp on the philosophy of dark energy like Bafa Marga does. And that's where the true power is, in the darkness, which is the feminine side, which predates physical form, which predates light. That's what it's really all about. Like, there's even people in the spiritual community, so-called spiritual community, because spirit just means breath. That's why I say so-called. A lot of these terms I use just for lack of calling it something else to make it make sense for the video. But yeah, a lot of people in the so-called spiritual community, they'll be like, I'm all about the divine feminine. I'm all about the great mother. I'm against the patriarchy. But they're still talking about the light. The darkness is bad. Got to get away from the darkness. It's all about the light, But Bafa Marga, she's just amazing to me. That's why I've made some songs for her, written some poems about her, because like Bafa, she's the bright gem that shines in the very darkness of her own created canvas, her own abyss. Bafa is the true light bearer, the true Luciferian who shines because she does the real shadow work. That's a true creator. That's the true divine feminine creative force right there. Shout out to Bafa Marga. What some refer to as the left-hand path is the path of chaos, and chaos doesn't have restraints. It's unbound. And that's the feminine energy. That's the womb of all things. That's the primordial waters. That's the beginning of everything that predates anything we understand in the mundane human world. And I think this is why such spirituality, or such philosophy, if you want to call it that, frightens so many people, because when you're conditioned into the human experience and you're clinging on to the human experience, and a lot of this in the so-called spiritual community too, talking about death like it's a bad thing. Like, no, it's a good thing to get out of this prison. But there's a lot of these concepts in the so-called spiritual community where a lot of people are like, if somebody passed away, oh, that's because they were on the wrong path and doing the wrong thing. No, you don't know. People just speculate and say all kind of things when they don't know what they're talking about. But yeah, check out Bafa Marga's channel. I'm gonna post it here at the bottom. Bafa's got some real good uploads. Like, she really knows her own self-source code, and she can teach what it means to reprogram yourself, to reprogram your own inner technology, which is the shadow work, which is required by doing the shadow work. She's someone who's one of the rare few that can really teach you that, about ascending out of this matrix, which the matrix is the physical material world, which is the light world, which is the prison. Like, Bafa has taught me a lot. She's been one of the most important parts upon my journey in this work, this shadow work. Bafa knows that the mama is the mother and the father. The mama is both, because darkness is, the pure primordial womb that all things are sprung from, that had to come before there was ever physical form, before there was ever life. It's the energy of what is within and what is without. But what is without, what is external, that's more the masculine, that's more the light. but it has to come after what is within, the dark, the womb, the primordial waters. So yeah, in reading the books by Ancient Face, The Wrath of the Subatomic Particles, which are available by contacting Baphomarga, you really can learn, the shadow work of reprogramming the subconscious mind in a way that you're not going to get the information anywhere else, And like I said, there's only a few of us that are really on this primordial vibration. Most people, they're just about the light. And that's always like a so-called red flag for me. Whenever I'm in a spiritual circle, like a live stream or something, and someone is talking about, well, of course, light. Like, why would you want darkness? Like, of course, we're all about the light. That's when I'm just like, oh no, here we go again with this, Yeah, Bafa is so beautiful to me. She has the most beautiful eyes. Bafa's eyes are like windows to the endless abyss of nurturing love. Her eyes are like the eclipse of the soul. And I love hearing Bafa's voice when she talks too. Hearing her sensual, tender voice, it's like hearing the maternal breath that blossoms every flower in the universe. Bafa enchants me. I am enchanted by that woman. She haunts me in a good way. Bafa is the beautiful black phantom who haunts my thoughts, because she is the very definition of the dark divine feminine. The mother of the silent night deep within. See, Bafa teaches me what true love is. Pure chaos. I didn't realize that before. The way she teaches me how to genuinely love is like an initiation for me. Bafa, you make me feel like a leaf in the wind being pulled by a great chaotic thunderstorm. The best way I could describe it, Baphomarga, the black raven, winged beautiful mother clothed in twilight. It's hard to explain, What I love about Bafa is that she doesn't seek or ask for attention. She just naturally draws my attention to her without needing to say anything, Bafa is that one woman that's so beautiful, it's like even the sun and moon become dark in her presence. It's like every shadow just gathers around her in pure love. Bafa is like that endless abyss that feels like home to me. I can't fully explain it. And when you really dive deep into this gnosis, like you're gonna understand Kali Ma, Sekhmet, La Santa Muerte, the Grim Reaper, Aset, Isis, Shub-Niggurath, the Necronomicon, all of these divine feminine energies, you really have to put it into perspective to see what these really are in order to be able to utilize these energies to do the work within self, to get to know self, to make the light crumble, to make the material physical world crumble. That's the path of returning to mother, of returning to the darkness, of returning to the great womb. But people that want to be all about the light, which is like everywhere, like you can throw a rock out the window and hit someone on the head who's all about the light and against the darkness. Those people are a dime a dozen everywhere. You got to just let them be where they are. Like everybody's where they need to be. And if it's only going to be a few that get this, then so be it. Even in Buddhism, the ancient Radhaswami of India, many of the mystics, they say that we'll all inevitably return to source anyway. So at the end of the day, what does it really matter? Whatever anybody's convinced of or whatever direction they're going in. That's why I don't emotionally invest in debating or trying to convince somebody else. No, you got to see it this way. Because again, that's the ego coming in. And what is the ego? The physical material, the light. And that's where we're striving to get away from, not closer to. But a lot of people don't see this. They may see themselves as spiritual or whatnot, but they're still under a Abrahamic or so-called right-hand path paradigm without realizing it. It's still under a masculine influence, even though they would like to say that spiritually they're all about the great womb, the great mother, the divine feminine. But it just is what it is.